I'm Marcus Chen, 47, and for 15 years, I believed I was the family failure. At 32, when my startup crashed and burned, my parents didn't just withdraw their support, they actively erased me from their lives. You're an embarrassment, my mother said, her voice cold as winter steel. Don't contact us until you've made something of yourself. The silence that followed broke something inside me. My siblings, comfortable in their traditional careers, watched as I became the cautionary tale whispered at family gatherings I was no longer invited to attend. But last month, everything changed. When Forbes published my company's $20 million valuation, my phone started ringing. The same voices that had dismissed me now spoke of misunderstandings and family bonds. They wanted back in, but they had no idea what their rejection had cost or what I'd learned about the true price of unconditional love. If you've ever felt abandoned by those who should have stood by you, this story is for you. The family portrait from 1995 still haunts me. I was 17, standing slightly behind my siblings, my smile forced and awkward. David, 2 years older, stood tall in his varsity jacket, already accepted to pre-med at Stanford. Jennifer, my younger sister by 3 years, clutched her debate trophy with the confidence of someone who'd never known failure. And there I was, the middle child who'd just dropped out of advanced calculus to pursue computer programming, a decision that earned me weeks of disappointed sighs from my parents. Marcus lacks focus, my father would tell relatives, his voice carrying that particular tone of parental frustration. He jumps from one thing to another. David knows exactly what he wants to be a surgeon, like his grandfather. Jennifer will make an excellent lawyer. But Marcus, he'd pause, searching for something positive to say about his middle son. Marcus is still finding himself. Those words stung more than outright criticism. At least criticism acknowledged my existence. This dismissal felt like being erased in real time. Our household operated on a strict meritocracy where love seemed proportional to achievement. David's A+ grades earned him praise at dinner. Jennifer's mock trial victories warranted celebration dinners. But my programming competitions, my small victories in building websites for local businesses, my passion for technologies were hobbies, not accomplishments worth acknowledging. My mother kept a wall of achievements in the hallway. David's medical school acceptance letter. Jennifer's law review publication. My space remained conspicuously empty, a daily reminder of my inadequacy in their eyes. When I won a regional coding competition at 18, I brought home the trophy with excitement, thinking this might finally earn me a spot on that wall. That's nice, dear, my mother said, barely looking up from Jennifer's latest academic honor. The trophy ended up on my bedroom shelf, collecting dust alongside my other invisible victories. The pattern established itself early and deep. Success was measured in traditional metrics, degrees from prestigious schools, professional titles that impressed neighbors, salaries that commanded respect. My fascination with emerging technologies, my belief that computers would change everything, my dreams of starting something revolutionary, these were the foolish fantasies of a young man who couldn't see the wisdom in conventional paths. Even now, after everything that's happened, I can still feel the weight of that family portrait. The boy standing in the shadows, already learning that love might be something you earned rather than something you simply received. By 2010, I was 32 and tired of being invisible. While David was establishing his surgical practice and Jennifer was making partner at her law firm, I was working as a senior developer at a tech company, making decent money but feeling like I was slowly disappearing into corporate anonymity. Every family gathering reinforced the same narrative. My siblings were building impressive careers, while I remained the underachiever with a computer job that nobody really understood. That's when I decided to bet everything on myself. The idea came to me during a frustrating meeting with a client who wanted to streamline their inventory management. Existing solutions were clunky, expensive, and required extensive training. I knew I could build something better, something intuitive, affordable, and powerful. For weeks I sketched out architectures, mapped user flows, and researched the market. The more I dug, the more convinced I became that this was my chance to finally prove myself. My business plan was 47 pages of pure ambition. I called the company's in IT, and I genuinely believed it would revolutionize how small businesses managed their operations. I had identified a real problem, developed an elegant solution, and calculated a path to profitability. On paper, everything looked perfect. The first person I shared it with was my girlfriend at the time, Rachel. She read through it carefully, asking thoughtful questions about market size and competition. Her enthusiasm gave me courage to take the next step. Presenting it to my family, I chose David's birthday dinner, thinking the celebratory atmosphere might make them more receptive to my news. After we sang happy birthday and cut the cake, I cleared my throat and announced that I had something important to share. I'm starting my own company, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've developed a revolutionary inventory management system that could transform how businesses operate. The silence that followed felt eternal. My father set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. My mother's smile faltered. David and Jennifer exchanged one of those wordless sibling communications that I'd never been part of. Marcus, my father finally said, you have a good job. Why would you risk that for something so uncertain? Because I believe in this. I've done the research. I've identified a real market need. The failure rate for startups is over 90%. Jennifer interrupted, her lawyer's instincts kicking in. Have you considered the legal implications? The liability issues? What about your 401k? Your health insurance? My mother added, her voice tight with worry. You can't just throw away security for a pipe dream. I tried to explain the opportunity, the potential for massive returns, the satisfaction of building something from nothing, but I could see in their faces that they'd already made their judgment. To them, I was the same unfocused kid who'd dropped advanced calculus, now chasing another impractical fantasy. Just think about it more, my father said with finality. Maybe talk to some people in business. Get a second opinion. But I'd already made my decision. 2 weeks later, I gave my notice, cashed out my retirement savings, and rented a small office space. Streamline IT was born, and I was finally going to show everyone what Marcus Chen was capable of. For 18 months, I lived in a bubble of delusional optimism. My small office became my second home, sometimes my first home when I'd fall asleep. At my desk, after coding for 16 hours straight, I hired 2 developers with the last of my savings, convinced that we were on the verge of something revolutionary. Every small Victoria demo that went well, a potential client who seemed interested, a feature that worked perfectly, felt like validation that I was finally on the right path. The warning signs were there, but I chose to ignore them. Potential clients would enthusiastically praise our product during demos, then mysteriously stop returning calls. The few sales we did close were small, nowhere near the enterprise-level contracts I'd projected. My burn rate was astronomical while revenue remained embarrassingly low. By month 15, I was maxing out credit cards to make payroll. We just need one big client, I kept telling myself. One major contract, and everything changes. But the big client never came. Instead, what came was a series of increasingly desperate measures. I borrowed against my car. I moved to a smaller apartment. I let my employees go with promises I couldn't keep about rehiring them once things turned around. By month 18, I was alone in an office I could no longer afford, staring at code that nobody wanted to buy. The bank foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday in March 2012. The clean official language couldn't mask the brutal reality. I had 30 days to vacate the premises. My business bank account had been frozen. My personal accounts were overdrawn. 2 years of work, every penny of my savings, and most of my retirement fund had evaporated. I sat in my empty office, surrounded by the debris of my dreams and paid invoices, marketing materials for a product that would never see success, coffee, cups from late nights that had led nowhere. The silence was deafening. For the first time in months, I wasn't frantically coding, or chasing leads, or trying to solve problems. I was just sitting in the wreckage of my ambition, finally understanding what failure actually felt like. The practical implications hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't afford my apartment's rent. My car was already 2 months behind on payments. I had no income, no prospects, and no savings. At 34, I was financially ruined and professionally humiliated. There was only one option, and it burned. Like acid in my throat, I had to move back in with my parents. The phone call to my mother was the hardest conversation of my life. Her voice was carefully neutral as I explained the situation, as if she'd been expecting this call for months. Of course you can stay in your old room, she said. But Marcus, we need to talk about your future. This can't happen again. Packing my few remaining possessions into boxers, I realized I wasn't just losing my business, I was losing my adult identity. I was about to become the middle-aged son who'd moved back home, the living embodiment of every skeptical prediction my family had made about my entrepreneurial dreams. The drive to my childhood home felt like a funeral procession. Every mile was a retreat from the independent life I'd built. Every turn a step back toward the role I'd spent years trying to escape. The family disappointment who couldn't make it in the real world. As I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house, I could see the curtains move in the front window. They were watching, waiting to welcome back their prodigal son who'd finally learned the hard lesson about the dangers of reaching too high. Living in my childhood bedroom at 34 was a special kind of psychological torture. The walls still held posters from my high school years. My old computer desk sat in the corner like a monument to simpler times. And every morning I awoke up to the same view I'd had as a teenager, except now it felt like evidence of how far I'd fallen rather than a place of possibility. My parents tried to be supportive, but their version of support felt like death by 1,000 cuts. It's temporary, my mother would say, her voice carrying the weight of someone trying to convince herself as much as me. You'll figure something out. My father was more direct. Maybe this is a sign that you should consider a more traditional path. The job search was humiliating, explaining a 2-year gap in employment, the failure of my business, the personal bankruptcy proceedings. Each interview felt like a public confession of my inadequacy. The few callbacks I received were for positions that paid half what I'd made before I'd started Streamline IT. I was moving backward in every measurable way. 3 months into this arrangement, the breaking point came during a family dinner. David was visiting with his wife and their new baby. Jennifer had just made junior partner, and the conversation naturally gravitated toward their successes. I sat there, unemployed and living in my parents' basement, feeling increasingly invisible. As they discussed vacation plans and home renovations, luxuries that seemed as foreign to me as space travel. "Marcus," my father said, suddenly turning the spotlight on me. "Any progress on the job front?" "I have a few leads," I lied, not wanting to admit that I'd been rejected for 3 positions that week. "You know," David said, his voice taking on that helpful older brother tone I'd learned to dread. "My hospital is looking for IT support staff. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work." I could put in a word. The offer was meant to be kind, but it felt like a final judgment. IT support. After everything I'd accomplished, everything I'd built, I was being offered the chance to reset passwords and troubleshoot printer problems. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I'm hoping to find something that utilizes my development skills." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken frustration. I could feel the weight of their collective disappointment, the sense that I was being unreasonably picky given my circumstances. That night, I found an envelope slipped under my bedroom door. Inside was a handwritten letter from my mother, her careful script carrying a message that would change everything. "Dear Marcus, your father and I have been discussing your situation, and we feel it's time for some honest conversation. You've been living here for 3 months, and while we want to support you, we can't enable this pattern of poor decisions indefinitely. You're 34 years old, and you need to face reality. Your business failed because you refused to listen to practical advice. You're unemployed because you're too proud to accept appropriate opportunities. You're living in your childhood bedroom because you made irresponsible choices with your finances. We love you, but we can't watch you continue to waste your potential on unrealistic dreams. It's time to grow up, accept responsibility, and build a stable life. Here are our conditions for continued support. You will take the first reasonable job offer you receive. You will not pursue any more entrepreneurial ventures without our explicit approval. You will begin paying rent and contributing to household expenses within 6 months. If you cannot agree to these terms, then you need to find somewhere else to live. We will not continue to enable your irresponsible behavior. This is our final offer. Choose wisely. Love. Mom and Dad. I read the letter 3 times, each pass making the words more real, more final. They weren't just disappointed in me, they were ashamed of me. They saw me as an embarrassment, a failure, a cautionary tale about the dangers of dreaming too big. The next morning, I knocked on their bedroom door at 7 a.m. They were both awake, my mother already dressed, my father reading the newspaper. With the careful attention of someone preparing for a difficult conversation, "I can't agree to your conditions," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I understand why you're disappointed, but I can't promise to give up on my dreams." My mother's face crumpled slightly, but my father's expression hardened. "Then you have 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live." 2 weeks? After 34 years of being their son, I had 14 days to disappear from their lives. The finality of it was breathtaking, clean, surgical, complete. "I hope someday you'll understand," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "We hope someday you'll grow up," my father replied. And those words followed me out of the room, out of the house, and into the uncertain future that awaited me. The studio apartment I found was barely 400 square feet of cracked linoleum and peeling paint, but it was mine. The lease agreement, signed with my last $300 and a prayer that my credit wouldn't be checked too carefully, represented something more valuable than its modest accommodations suggested. My independence, however fragile it might be. The place came furnished with items that belonged in a garage sale: a pull-out couch that groaned ominously when opened, a kitchenette with 2 working burners, and a bathroom so small I had to step into the hallway to fully open the door. But sitting on that threadbare couch on my first night, eating ramen noodles by the light of a single working lamp, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: the possibility of starting over. Finding work proved easier than I'd expected, though not in any way that salvaged my pride. A temp agency placed me at a call center handling technical support for a major retailer. The job paid $12 an hour, less than half what I'd made as a developer, a fraction of what I'd dreamed of earning as an entrepreneur, but it was a paycheck. And at that moment, a paycheck meant survival. The work was numbing. 8 hours a day of helping customers reset passwords, troubleshoot basic connectivity issues, and navigate software they should have learned years ago. My colleagues were mostly college students or people between careers, all of us united by the temporary nature of our circumstances. I told myself this was temporary too, just a bridge to something better. But the nights were the hardest part. Alone in my tiny apartment, surrounded by the silence of my own thoughts, the weight of everything I'd lost would settle on me like a physical presence. I'd lost my business, my savings, my home, my family's respect, and, perhaps worst of all, my confidence in my own judgment. Maybe they'd been right all along. Maybe I was just a dreamer who couldn't face reality. Depression crept in slowly. Then all at once, Some mornings I'd wake up and stare at the ceiling for an hour, trying to find the energy to get out of bed and face another day of technical support calls. I'd gained 20 pounds from a diet of convenience store food and stress eating. I'd stopped returning calls from the few friends who still checked on me, too ashamed to admit how far I'd fallen. The lowest point came on a Thursday evening in September. I'd been at the call center for 2 months, and my supervisor had just praised my work, suggesting I might be promoted to team lead, a position that would add an entire $1 to my hourly wage. The pathetic nature of this opportunity hit me like a physical blow. This was my ceiling now. This was as high as I was allowed to reach. I walked home through the drizzle, past coffee shops where people my age sat with laptops, probably building the kinds of companies I'd once dreamed of creating. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, watching from the outside as the world moved forward without me. That night, I called David. It was the first time I'd reached out to any family member since leaving home, and my hands shook as I dialed his number. Marcus? His voice carried surprise and what might have been concern. How are you? I started, then stopped. How was I? Broken, defeated, living in a studio apartment, and troubleshooting password resets for a living. I'm managing. Where are you staying? I told him about the apartment, the job, the careful budgeting that allowed me to eat and pay rent with nothing left over. He listened without judgment, and for a moment I thought maybe this could be the beginning of rebuilding some family connection. Have you thought about talking to Mom and Dad? He asked finally. I think they'd be willing to discuss things if you were ready to. Ready to what? I interrupted. Ready to admit they were right. Ready to give up everything I believe in. The silence stretched between us. Marcus, maybe it's time to be practical. There's no shame in accepting help, but there was shame in it, at least for me. There was shame in surrender, shame in admitting that my dreams had been delusions, shame in becoming the cautionary tale they'd always expected me to be. After I hung up, I sat in my tiny kitchen and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to give up. I was going to prove them wrong, not through words or promises, but through actions. I was going to build something again, but this time I'd be smarter, more careful, more strategic. I just had to figure out how to do it. With $12 an hour and a credit score that looked like a phone number, the coffee shop where I met Alina Rodriguez was nothing special, one of those generic chains that dotted every strip mall in America. I'd started going there after work, nursing a single cup of coffee for hours while I worked on coding projects on my ancient laptop, partly to get out of my cramped apartment, and partly because the Wi-Fi was free. It was there, on a rainy Thursday evening in October, that my life began to change again. I'd been struggling with a particularly complex algorithm when a woman at the next table leaned over. Excuse me, she said, but I couldn't help noticing. Your code. Are you working on inventory optimization? Alina was in her mid-40s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of confidence that comes from years of hard-won success. She introduced herself as the founder of 3 successful tech companies, currently working as a consultant while she decided on her next venture. What struck me immediately wasn't her impressive resume, but the way she looked at my work, not with judgment, but with genuine curiosity. Mind if I sit? She asked. And before I knew it, we were deep in conversation about algorithms, market opportunities, and the challenges of building scalable systems. For the first time in months, I felt like someone was seeing me as a technologist rather than a failure. Tell me about your last company, she said. And I found myself opening up about Streamly Nightnot, the sanitized version I'd practiced for job interviews. But the real story of ambition, mistakes, and ultimate collapse. Alina listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. You made rookie mistakes, she said finally. Classic first-time founder errors. But the core idea was sound, and your technical execution was solid. Not solid enough, I said bitterly. Marcus, she said, using my name for the first time. Do you know how many companies I started before I had my first success? I shook my head. For complete failures before I built something that worked. The difference between entrepreneurs who succeed and those who don't isn't talent or luck, it's the willingness to learn from failure and try again. Over the next hour, Alina dissected my business failure with the precision of a surgeon, identifying specific mistakes, pursuing too broad a market initially, underestimating customer acquisition costs, building features customers said they wanted instead of features they would actually pay for. But she also pointed out things I'd done right: the clean architecture, the scalable design, the genuine understanding of the problem I was trying to solve. The question isn't whether you can build a successful company, she said, as we prepared to leave. The question is whether you're willing to be honest about what went wrong and disciplined about doing it better next time. We exchanged contact information, and she made an offer that stunned me. I meet with entrepreneurs every Thursday evening, right here. Informal mentoring, war stories, problem solving. You should come. The following Thursday I discovered that Elena's informal mentoring was actually a small but impressive group of entrepreneurs at various stages of their journeys. There was James, who'd sold his second company and was working on his third. Sarah, whose startup was in the middle of Series A funding. Mike, who was bootstrapping a consulting business while developing his own product. These weren't the polished success stories you read about in magazines. These were people who'd failed, learned, adapted, and kept pushing forward. They shared their mistakes, openly offered practical advice without judgment, and treated entrepreneurship as a craft to be mastered rather than a lottery to be won. Alina became my unofficial mentor, meeting with me separately to work through specific challenges. She helped me understand that my biggest mistake with Streamline IT hadn't been technical, it had been emotional. I'd been so invested in proving myself to my family that I'd ignored market signals and customer feedback. I'd built what I wanted to build rather than what the market needed. Success in business isn't about being right, she told me one evening. It's about being adaptable. Your family wanted you to follow a safe path, so you rebelled by taking enormous risks. But there's a middle ground: calculated risks, strategic thinking, building something sustainable rather than something dramatic. Over several months, Alina helped me develop a new framework for thinking about business. Instead of swinging for the fences, I needed to focus on singles and doubles. Instead of trying to revolutionize entire industries, I should solve specific problems for specific customers. Instead of seeking validation from people who didn't understand entrepreneurship, I should build relationships with people who did. Most importantly, she helped me understand that my failure didn't define me, it educated me. Every entrepreneur failed. The successful ones just failed forward, using each setback as data for the next attempt. Your family sees failure as a character flaw, Alina said during one of our conversations. But in entrepreneurship, failure is tuition. You've paid your tuition, Marcus. Now it's time to put your education to work. By spring, I had the beginnings of a new business plan, a clearer understanding of my own strengths and weaknesses, and something I'd lost after Streamline IT collapsed: the quiet confidence that comes from having a mentor who believes in your potential. My second company began at 5 a.m. in my studio, apartment's makeshift office, a folding table I'd bought at a yard sale positioned near the only window that got decent light. While my neighbors slept, I coded. While they ate breakfast, I debugged. While they commuted to their regular jobs, I was already 3 hours deep into building what would eventually become DataBridge Solutions. This time, I was smarter. Alina. Mentoring had taught me to start small, validate early, and build incrementally. Instead of trying to revolutionize inventory management for all businesses, I focused on a specific niche: small logistics companies that needed real-time tracking, integration between their dispatch systems and customer portals. I'd identified this gap through careful market research and conversations with potential customers, something I'd never bothered to do with Streamline IT. The beauty of my new approach was its stealth nature. I kept my call center job, arriving at 9 a.m. after already putting in 4 hours of development work. My colleagues saw me as the quiet guy who showed up on time and handled his queue efficiently. They had no idea that by lunch break, I'd often solved more complex technical problems than I'd face in my entire 8-hour shift. The first client came through a cold email campaign I'd crafted carefully during my lunch breaks. Martinez Logistics, a family-owned trucking company, needed their drivers to update delivery statuses in real time without switching between 3 different apps. I built them a simple integration that saved their drivers 15 minutes per delivery. The contract was only $800 per month, but it was proof of concept. I reinvested every penny back into the business. The $800 monthly payment covered basic server costs and allowed me to purchase better development tools. More importantly, it gave me a live testing ground to refine my product. Every bug, Martinez reported, every feature they requested, every workflow improvement they suggested became valuable data for building something scalable. That the loneliness of those early months was profound in a way I hadn't anticipated. When Streamline IT failed, at least I'd had the comfort of public failure. People knew what I was attempting, even if they disapproved. This time, my success was as invisible as my struggle. I celebrated landing my second client, Thompson Distribution, by eating takeout alone in my apartment. There was no one to share the victory with. No one who understood the significance of growing from $800 to $1,600 in monthly recurring revenue. My coworkers at the call center occasionally asked about my weekend plans or evening activities. But how could I explain that I spent every free moment building software for logistics companies? That my idea of entertainment was debugging API integrations? That my social life consisted entirely of customer discovery calls and code reviews? I developed a routine that bordered on obsessive. Wake at 4:30 a.m., code until 8:30 a.m., shower and commute to the call center, work my shift while mentally solving development problems, return home and code until 11 p.m., repeat. Weekends were 12-hour development marathons, interrupted only by grocery runs and laundry. The breakthrough came 7 months in, when I landed my first enterprise client. Pacific Freight Solutions needed a comprehensive system that could handle their network of 60 independent contractors. The contract was worth $4,200 per month, more than I made at my day job. For the first time since starting over, I could see a path to financial independence. But I didn't quit the call center immediately. Alina had taught me to be conservative with cash flow projections, and I'd learned from my streamlined IT experience that one large client could disappear as quickly as they'd appeared. I needed at least 6 months of operating expenses saved before I could afford to go full-time on DataBridge. The most difficult part wasn't the technical challenges or the long hours, it was the isolation from my family. There were moments when I wanted desperately to call David or Jennifer to share my progress with someone who'd known me before my failures. I wanted to tell them that I was building something real again, something sustainable and profitable. But I'd burned those bridges when I refused to accept their conditions for support. Instead, I channeled that need for connection into my work. Every satisfied customer email, every successful integration, every small milestone became evidence that I was rebuilding not just a business, but my identity as someone who could create value in the world. By month 10, DataBridge had 8 clients generating $11,400 in monthly recurring revenue. I'd built a reputation in the logistics industry as the guy who could solve integration problems that larger companies considered too small to bother with. My software was running in trucks across 3 states, facilitating thousands of deliveries every week. The contract with my first major client arrived on a Tuesday morning in June. Regional Express Logistics wanted to standardize their entire network of contractors on my platform. The deal was worth $127,000 annually, more money than I'd ever made in a single year. Even during my corporate days, I printed out the signed contract and sat at my folding table, staring at the numbers. This wasn't just a business milestone. It was proof that I could rebuild, that my family had been wrong about my character and my capabilities, that the dreams they'd dismissed as unrealistic were actually sustainable realities. For the first time in 2 years, I allowed myself to imagine what success might actually feel like. The patent application that would change everything started as a solution to a problem I'd never intended to solve. One of my logistics clients, Harbor Freight Distributors, was struggling with a unique challenge. Their drivers needed to update delivery statuses in areas with poor cellular coverage, but the updates needed to sync automatically when connectivity returned. Existing solutions required manual intervention, leading to delayed updates and frustrated customers. I spent 3 weeks developing what I initially called Smart Queue Sync, an algorithm that could intelligently batch and prioritize data synchronization based on connection, quality, data importance, and business rules. The system learned from usage patterns, predicting which updates were most critical and ensuring they transmitted first when limited bandwidth became available. But what started as a custom solution for one client quickly revealed its broader applications. The algorithm didn't just work for delivery updates, it could optimize any data synchronization challenge where connectivity was inconsistent. Field service companies, remote monitoring systems, mobile point-of-sale applications, industries faced variations of the same problem. Alina recognized the significance before I did. During one of our Thursday evening meetings, I was explaining the technical elegance of the solution when she stopped me mid-sentence. "Marcus, do you realize what you've built?" she asked. "This isn't just a feature for your logistics platform. This is intellectual property that could license to hundreds of companies." That night, I researched existing patents in the data synchronization space. The landscape was crowded with solutions for specific use cases, but no one had developed a general-purpose algorithm that could adapt to multiple industries and connection scenarios. My approach of using machine learning to predict optimal sync strategies appeared to be genuinely novel. Filing the provisional patent application was a $1,600 investment that stretched my limited budget, but Alina insisted it was crucial. "You're not just protecting an algorithm," she explained. "You're establishing ownership of a platform technology that could become the foundation for licensing deals worth millions." The breakthrough client came through an unexpected channel. Dr. Sarah Chen, a former colleague from my corporate days, had been following DataBridge's growth through industry publications. She was now CTO at Medflow Systems, a company that developed mobile applications for healthcare providers. Their biggest challenge was ensuring that patient data updates reached central servers even when doctors and nurses were working in hospital basements or rural clinics with spotty connectivity. "We've evaluated every major synchronization platform on the market," Sarah told me during our first call. "They all require significant custom development and still don't handle edge cases well. But what you've described with Smart Queue Sync could solve our core technical challenge." The contract negotiation took 3 months and required me to present to Medflow's technical committee, legal team, and executive leadership. Unlike my logistics clients, who were generally small businesses making practical decisions, Medflow was a venture-backed company with institutional investors and rigorous evaluation processes. I'd never presented to a room of this caliber: CTOs from major healthcare systems, venture capital partners who'd funded billion-dollar companies, attorneys specializing in healthcare, technology, compliance, but I'd learned from my streamlined IT failure. Instead of overselling the vision, I focused on concrete results. performance benchmarks, reliability metrics, actual cost savings my existing clients had achieved. The demonstration was flawless. I'd spent weeks preparing a controlled test environment, where I could simulate various connectivity scenarios in real time, as I showed how Smart QSync adapted to changing network conditions, automatically prioritizing critical medical data while queuing less urgent updates. I could see understanding dawn in the faces around the conference table. This is exactly what we need, Dr. Chen said after the presentation. How quickly can you scale to handle our user base? The contract terms exceeded my wildest projections. Medflow agreed to a 3-year licensing deal worth $750,000 annually, with additional performance bonuses if the system met specific reliability targets. But more valuable than the immediate revenue was the validation. A venture-backed healthcare technology company had bet their core infrastructure on my algorithm. The signed contract arrived via overnight delivery on a Friday afternoon. I was alone in my studio apartment, still working from my folding table despite DataBridge now generating enough revenue to afford proper office space. I'd been too focused on growth to invest in comfort, too paranoid about cash flow to celebrate incremental victories. But this wasn't incremental. This was transformational. I called Alina first, my voice shaking as I read the contract terms over the phone. Her excitement was infectious. She understood not just the financial implications, but the strategic significance of proving that my technology could compete at the enterprise level. This changes everything, she said. You're not just running a services business anymore. You're licensing platform technology. That's how you build a company worth tens of millions. That evening, I allowed myself a small celebration. I bought a bottle of wine that cost more than $15. My first such extravagance in over 2 years, and sat on my cramped balcony watching the sunset over the city. Somewhere out there, my family was probably having dinner, discussing David's latest surgical successes or Jennifer's recent cases, unaware that their failed son had just signed a contract that would change his life forever. For the first time since Streamline IT collapsed, I felt something approaching vindication. Not revenge that seemed petty, now, but proof that I'd been right to bet on myself. Right to ignore their advice. Right to believe that innovation and persistence could overcome conventional wisdom. The technology I'd built in my studio apartment was about to be deployed in hospitals across the country, potentially improving healthcare delivery for millions of patients. That seemed like a better legacy than any traditional career path my family had envisioned for me. ***, the employee handbook I created for DataBridge Solutions was only 12 pages long, but it represented something profound. The transformation from a one-man operation into a real company. By the time I hired my third employee, I realized I needed to document everything from vacation policies to code review procedures, the kind of infrastructure I'd never bothered to build during my Streamline IT days. Moving out of my studio apartment and into actual office space felt like crossing a psychological threshold. The 2,400 square foot suite in a converted warehouse wasn't glamorous, but it had real conference rooms, dedicated server space, and enough room for the team I was rapidly building. On moving day, as I packed up my folding table and single monitor setup, I couldn't help but smile at how far I'd come from those 4 a.m. coding sessions in my cramped living room. My first hire was Rachel Kim, a brilliant developer I'd worked with at my previous corporate job. She'd been freelancing since having her daughter, looking for a stable position that offered both technical challenges and work-life balance. When I offered her a senior developer role with equity participation, she didn't hesitate. "I've been watching what you're building," she told me on her first day. "The Smart QSync technology is genuinely innovative. I want to be part of growing this." The second hire was harder to justify financially but critical for our growth trajectory. James Morrison was a sales engineer with deep experience in healthcare technology. His previous company had been acquired by a Fortune 500 firm, and he understood the complex sales cycles that enterprise contracts required. His salary demands were substantial, but Alina convinced me that revenue growth required professional sales capabilities. "You can't scale by doing everything yourself," she reminded me during one of our weekly check-ins. "Your job now is building systems and hiring people who are better than you at specific functions." The challenges of managing employees were entirely different from the technical challenges of building software. Rachel and James brought their own perspectives, work styles, and expectations, creating coherent team processes while maintaining the agility that had made DataBridge successful required constant balancing. Our first major client crisis tested everything we'd built. Medflow's user base was growing faster than projected, and our servers were struggling to handle the load. During peak usage periods, for 3 days, we worked around the clock optimizing database queries, scaling server infrastructure, and implementing caching strategies that could handle the increased demand. I found myself sleeping on the office couch, surviving on coffee and determination, just like the early Streamline IT days. But this time felt different. I wasn't alone. Rachel was debugging performance bottlenecks while James managed client communications, ensuring Medflow's leadership understood we were treating their problems as our highest priority. The resolution came when we identified a subtle bug in our connection pooling algorithm that was causing memory leaks during high concurrency scenarios. The fix required rewriting a core component of our synchronization engine. But once deployed, system performance improved dramatically not just for Medflow, but for all our clients. This is what separates good companies from great ones, James told me as we watched server metrics stabilize. Great companies don't just solve problems, they use problems to improve their fundamental capabilities. By year's end, we'd grown to 8 employees and $3.2 million in annual recurring revenue. But success brought new pressures I hadn't anticipated. Clients expected 24/7 support for mission-critical systems. Employees deserved professional development opportunities and competitive benefits. Investors Alina had introduced me to several potential funding sources were starting to express interest in our growth trajectory. The employee handbook I'd written during those early days already felt outdated. We needed HR policies, performance review processes, and career advancement frameworks. I was spending more time in meetings about business operations than writing code, a transition that felt both necessary and slightly heartbreaking. Alina helped me understand that this evolution was healthy. You're not losing your identity as a technologist, she explained. You're growing into your identity as a leader. The technology will always be important, but your biggest impact now comes from building an organization that can scale your innovations. The most surreal moment came during our first company holiday party. We'd rented the private dining room at a nice restaurant, and I found myself giving a speech to employees who'd chosen to bet their careers on DataBridge's success. Looking around the table at people who trusted my vision enough to join this journey, I realized I'd accidentally become the kind of leader I'd always imagined working for. 2 years ago, I was answering tech support calls for $12 an hour. I told the team, "Tonight, we're celebrating technology that's being used in hospitals across the country. None of this would have been possible without your talent, dedication, and willingness to build something meaningful together." After the party, I sat in my car in the restaurant parking lot, thinking about the path that had brought me here. The family who disowned me was missing this moment, missing the chance to see what their son had built from nothing, missing the opportunity to meet the talented people who believed in his vision, but their absence no longer felt like loss. It felt like freedom, the freedom to define success on my own terms, to build something that mattered, to create a chosen family of colleagues and mentors who understood what it meant to pursue dreams despite the risks. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I was simply building something valuable and enjoying the process of turning vision into reality. ****. The company Christmas party photo from 2018 sits on my desk, even now, a reminder of how success can feel simultaneously fulfilling and hollow. In the picture, I'm surrounded by 23 employees, all of us smiling in the decorated conference room of our expanded office space. DataBridge had just closed its best quarter ever. Our technology was running in over 400 client locations, and I'd recently been featured in TechCrunch as one of 30 under 40 entrepreneurs to watch. Though I was actually 40 by then. But what the photo doesn't show is the empty chair I'd unconsciously saved at my table, the reflexive glance toward the door every few minutes, the hollow feeling that comes from celebrating achievements with people who didn't know you before you became successful. These employees were my chosen family, and I was genuinely grateful for their dedication, but they'd never seen me fail. They'd never known the broken man who'd lived on ramen noodles and worked tech support for survival. During my speech that night, I talked about gratitude, teamwork, and the exciting year ahead. I mentioned the new partnerships we were building, the innovative features we'd be launching, the market expansion opportunities that would drive our growth. What I didn't mention was the email I'd drafted earlier that day to my brother, David, the 20th such draft I'd written and deleted in the past year. The milestones kept accumulating without anyone from my original life to witness them. When we hit $10 million in annual revenue, I celebrated alone in my office after everyone had gone home. When the patent office officially approved my smart Q-Sync technology, granting me intellectual property rights that industry experts valued at over $50 million, I bought myself dinner at an expensive restaurant and ate in silence. The Forbes interview request had arrived 3 months earlier. The reporter, Maria Santos, was writing a feature about overlooked innovators whose technologies were reshaping entire industries. She'd discovered DataBridge through a case study. Harvard Business School had written about our healthcare applications. Your synchronization technology has become the de facto standard for mobile healthcare applications, she told me during our 2-hour interview. Yet you've somehow managed to stay below the radar while building what appears to be a generational company. I'd learned to tell my story strategically by then, emphasizing the technical innovations and market opportunities while downplaying the personal struggles that had motivated my journey. The narrative that emerged focused on my vision for solving connectivity challenges across industries, the careful bootstrapping that had allowed us to maintain control while scaling rapidly, and the team-building philosophy that had attracted top talent despite competing against much larger companies. "What drives you?" Maria had asked near the end of our conversation. "You could have sold DataBridge several times by now. Private equity firms have approached you, and I'm told Microsoft made a serious acquisition offer last year. Why do you keep building instead of cashing out? The honest answer that I was driven by a need to prove wrong the family members who dismissed my dreams felt too personal to share with a Forbes reporter. Instead, I talked about the satisfaction of solving complex problems, the responsibility I felt toward employees who'd trusted their careers to my vision, and the potential for our technology to create positive impact across multiple industries. But late at night, alone in my increasingly comfortable but still solitary apartment, I wondered if my motivation was healthy. Was I building because I genuinely loved the work, or because I was trying to accumulate enough success to force my family to acknowledge their mistake? Was I pursuing innovation or revenge? The question became more pressing as our valuation climbed. Alina had helped me engage with several investment banks to establish a baseline company value for employee stock options. Their preliminary assessment ranged from $15 million to $22 million, depending on revenue multiples and growth projections. For a bootstrapped company that had started in my studio apartment, these numbers represented vindication beyond my wildest projections, yet the achievement felt incomplete without witnesses who understood its significance. My employees celebrated our successes, but they hadn't known me when I was living on pity and determination. Alina appreciated the business accomplishment, but she hadn't watched me fail catastrophically 5 years earlier. The people who could truly appreciate how far I'd traveled weren't there to see the destination. The hardest moment came during a client dinner with executives from regional medical systems. One of our largest healthcare clients, Dr. Patricia Williams, their CTO, was describing how our technology had improved patient outcomes at their network of rural clinics. "We've reduced data synchronization errors by 89% since implementing your system," she said. In practical terms, that means better patient care, fewer medical errors, and improved efficiency for our doctors and nurses. Your innovation is literally saving lives. I should have felt pure satisfaction at that moment. This was why I'd endured the failures, the financial struggles, the family rejection to build something that created genuine value in the world. But instead, I found myself thinking about my parents, wondering if they'd be proud to know their dismissed son had developed technology that was improving healthcare delivery. After the dinner, I sat in my car and finally sent the email I'd been drafting and deleting for months. "David, I know it's been years since we've spoken, but I wanted you to know that I'm doing well. I've built a successful technology company that serves healthcare providers like yourself. I'm not reaching out because I need anything, quite the opposite. I just thought you should know that your little brother figured things out after all." I stared at the message for 20 minutes before deleting it. Some victories, I realized, had to be celebrated alone until the people who mattered most were ready to witness them. The question was whether that day would ever come, and whether I'd still care about their approval when it did. I met Sarah Delacour at the most unexpected place, a venture capital networking event I'd been reluctantly attending on Elena's advice. "You need to build relationships in the investment community," she'd insisted. "Even if you're not raising capital now, these connections become valuable as you scale." The event was everything I'd expected: polished conversations about valuations, end market opportunities, entrepreneurs practicing their elevator pitches, investors scanning the room for the next big thing. I was preparing to leave early when I noticed a woman standing alone near the refreshment table, looking as uncomfortable as I felt. Sarah was an intellectual property attorney specializing in technology patents, attending the event to meet potential clients. She had shoulder-length auburn hair, intelligent brown eyes, and the kind of genuine smile that seemed rare in rooms full of people trying to impress each other. When she struck up a conversation about the quality of the coffee, "Is it just me, or does everything taste better when it's free at these events?" I found myself laughing for the first time all evening. "I'm probably the worst networker in this room," she admitted. "I came because my partner insisted I needed to meet more entrepreneurs, but mostly I just want to talk about patent law, which makes me incredibly boring at parties." "I wouldn't say boring," I replied. "I actually just received a patent for synchronization technology, and I'm realizing I don't understand half the legal implications." That led to a 2-hour conversation that covered everything from intellectual property strategy to the ethics of software, patents to our shared appreciation for obscure science fiction novels. Sarah had grown up in New Orleans, earned her law degree from Georgetown, and moved to the West Coast because she wanted to work at the intersection of technology and legal innovation. What struck me most about our conversation wasn't her professional expertise, but her emotional intelligence. When I mentioned building my company after some setbacks, she didn't pry for details or offer unsolicited advice. She simply listened, asked thoughtful questions, and shared her own story of career transitions and personal challenges. Our first official date was dinner at a small Italian restaurant near her office. I'd been nervous about explaining my background: the family estrangement, the business failure, the years of rebuilding, but Sarah created a space where vulnerability felt safe rather than risky. "My family thinks I'm crazy for specializing in tech patents," she told me over wine. They're all traditional lawyers, corporate law, real estate, estate planning. They don't understand why I'd want to work with computer people instead of established industries. The parallel wasn't exact, but her experience of family disapproval helped her understand mine without judgment. When I finally told her about Streamline IT's collapse and my parents' ultimatum, she didn't offer platitudes about family forgiveness or suggest that I should reach out to them. Some families struggle with unconventional paths, she said simply. That's their limitation, not yours. Our relationship developed gradually, built on shared interests and genuine compatibility rather than dramatic romance. Sarah appreciated my technical curiosity. I admired her legal precision. She taught me to appreciate New Orleans jazz. I introduced her to the elegant problem-solving of software architecture. We both valued quiet evenings over social events, intellectual conversation over small talk, building something meaningful together over pursuing individual ambitions. 6 months into our relationship, Sarah met my DataBridge team at our annual summer picnic. Watching her interact with my employees, asking thoughtful questions about their work, remembering details from previous conversations, treating everyone with genuine respect regardless of their role, I realized she understood something fundamental about my values that my family never had. Your team really respects you, she told me afterward, not because you're the boss, but because you've created something they believe in. That takes a special kind of leadership. The conversation that changed everything happened on a quiet Sunday morning in her apartment. We were reading the newspaper together, an old-fashioned ritual we'd both maintained despite getting most of our news online. When she showed me an article about family businesses navigating generational transitions, "Do you think you'll ever reconcile with your parents?" she asked gently. I used to think I would, I answered honestly. I used to imagine the moment when I had achieved enough success that they'd have to admit they were wrong. But now, I paused, trying to articulate something I'd been feeling but hadn't expressed. Now I'm not sure I need their validation anymore. What changed? I looked around her apartment, the bookshelves filled with legal texts and novels, the artwork from local artists, the comfortable furniture that reflected her personality rather than any attempt to impress visitors. Then, I looked at her, this remarkable woman who'd chosen to build a life with me based on who I actually was, rather than who I might become. I found something better than their approval, I said. I found someone who accepts me completely. The engagement ring I'd custom designed reflected everything I'd learned about building something meaningful from scratch. Instead of purchasing a traditional diamond, I'd worked with a jeweler to create a setting that incorporated a small piece of silicon wafer, the same material that formed the foundation of all the technology I'd built. It was unconventional, personal, and represented our shared appreciation for innovation over tradition. When I proposed 6 months later, it wasn't because I wanted to prove anything to my family or achieve another milestone in my predetermined life plan. It was because I'd found someone who understood that love, like successful entrepreneurship, was built on mutual respect, shared values, and the daily choice to support each other's growth. Sarah said yes immediately, laughing at the silicon wafer detail and calling it the nerdiest romantic gesture in history. But her tears were real, as she added, "I love that you built this ring the same way you built everything else." By understanding what really matters and creating something unique, for the first time in my adult life, I felt truly understood by someone who mattered. The family that had rejected me seemed less important now that I'd found someone who'd chosen me completely. Sarah wasn't just my partner. She was proof that the most meaningful relationships were built on acceptance rather than conditions, understanding rather than expectations, love rather than achievement. The Forbes photographer arrived at our offices on a Tuesday morning in March, carrying enough equipment to document a small war. Maria Santos had warned me that the visual component of the feature story was crucial. Readers connect with faces behind innovations, but I hadn't expected the production value of a magazine cover shoot. We want to capture the working entrepreneur, the photographer explained while setting up lights in our main conference room. Not posed, not corporate, but you in your natural environment building something revolutionary. The irony wasn't lost on me. My most natural environment for the past decade had been cramped apartments and shared office spaces, surviving on determination and instant coffee. Now they wanted to photograph me in our sleek conference room with its panoramic city views, surrounded by the symbols of conventional business success. Maria conducted the final interview while the photographer worked around us, asking follow-up questions about DataBridge's growth, trajectory, and market position. The story had evolved since our initial conversation. What began as a profile of an overlooked innovator had become something more comprehensive as she'd researched our impact across multiple industries. Your synchronization technology is being used by 847 companies across healthcare, logistics, field services, and retail, she said, reading from her notes. Conservative estimates suggest your algorithms process over 12 million data transactions daily. When did you realize you'd built something this significant? The question required me to compress years of gradual realization into a soundbite that would work for magazine readers. The honest answer was that I'd been too focused on immediate challenges, client problems, technical debt, cash flow management, to appreciate the broader significance until recently. Innovation often happens incrementally, I replied carefully. We solved specific problems for specific clients, then realized our solutions could address similar challenges across entire industries. The significance became clear when we saw the scale of adoption and the measurable impact on our clients' operations. What I didn't mention was the moment 3 weeks earlier when I'd received an email from Dr. Patricia Williams at Regional Medical Systems. She'd forwarded a report showing that our technology had contributed to a 23% reduction in medical errors at their rural clinics over the past year. Your system helped us save lives, she'd written. I thought you should know that your innovation has real-world impact beyond the technical metrics. That email had shifted something fundamental in my understanding of success. The revenue numbers, valuation multiples, and growth projections were important for business sustainability, but the human impact of our work gave it meaning that transcended financial achievement. The photographer captured me explaining our core algorithm on the whiteboard in our development area, reviewing code with Rachel and our newest senior developer, and working at my standing desk with our client support dashboard visible in the background. Each shot was designed to show entrepreneurship as active problem-solving rather than passive wealth accumulation. One more question, Maria said, as the session wrapped up. Sources tell me you've turned down multiple acquisition offers, including a serious approach from Microsoft that valued DataBridge at over $30 million. What would it take for you to consider selling? The question cut directly to something I'd been wrestling with privately. The Microsoft offer had been real, substantial, and strategically sound. Their integration of our technology into their enterprise software suite could have accelerated our market penetration by years, but accepting would have meant losing control of something I'd built from nothing, joining a massive organization where my innovations would become small components of larger systems. We're building something that could be transformational across multiple industries, I answered. Selling now would be like selling a novel after writing the first few chapters. The most interesting parts of our story haven't been written yet. The Forbes feature was scheduled to publish in 6 weeks, timed to coincide with the annual TechCrunch Disrupt conference, where I'd been invited to speak about entrepreneurial persistence. Maria warned me that magazine profiles could generate significant attention, interview requests, investment inquiries, speaking opportunities, and increased scrutiny from competitors. Your company will be more visible after this publishes, she said. That brings opportunities, but also pressure. Are you prepared for that level of exposure? I thought about my family as she asked the question. For 8 years, I'd built DataBridge in relative obscurity, growing steadily without attracting the kind of attention that might reach my parents' social circles. The Forbes profile would change that. It would make my success undeniably public, impossible to ignore or dismiss. Part of me was terrified by that prospect. What if they reached out after reading the article? What if they didn't? Which scenario would be more painful? Continued silence or conditional reconciliation based on achieved success rather than accepted failure? But another part of me felt ready for whatever consequences the exposure might bring. I'd built something valuable independent of their approval. I'd found love with someone who understood my journey. I'd created meaningful work that improved people's lives. Their reaction or lack thereof couldn't diminish those accomplishments. I think we're ready, I told Maria. We've been building toward this level of recognition for years. It's time to share our story with a broader audience. 3 weeks later, I received the advanced copy of the article. The headline read, "The Quiet Revolutionary: How Marcus Chen Built a $20 million Company That's Reshaping Data Synchronization." The accompanying photo showed me at our conference room whiteboard. Mid-explanation completely focused on solving a technical problem. Reading the article felt surreal, my journey from Streamline IT's failure through DataBridge's success, compressed into 2,400 words that would reach millions of readers. Maria had captured both the technical innovation and the human persistence, painting a picture of entrepreneurship as methodical problem-solving rather than heroic risk-taking. The most striking element was the estimated valuation, $20 million, based on our revenue growth, intellectual property portfolio, and market position. Investment bankers had provided Forbes with a conservative estimate of DataBridge's worth. Seeing that number in print associated with my name, my work, my vision, like crossing a threshold I'd been approaching for years. In 48 hours, that magazine would hit newsstands nationwide. My success would become public knowledge, impossible to ignore or explain away. After 8 years of building in relative silence, Marcus Chen was about to become visible again, this time on his own terms, with achievements that spoke for themselves. The Forbes article hit newsstands on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, my phone had buzzed with 47 text messages, 23 missed calls, and an inbox containing over 200 new emails. The flood of attention was overwhelming, but it was 3 specific messages that stopped my world completely. The first came from Jennifer at 2:17 p.m. "Marcus saw the Forbes article. We need to talk. Call me when you get this." The second arrived 20 minutes later from David. "Congratulations on your success. Mom and Dad saw the magazine. We should all sit down soon. But it was the third message, sent at 4:33 p.m. from a number I hadn't seen in 8 years, that hit me like a physical blow. Marcus, this is Mom. We are so proud of what you've accomplished. Please call us. We love you and want to make things right. I stared at my phone screen, reading those words over and over until they blurred. We are so proud. We love you. After 8 years of silence, after building a company worth $20 million, after proving every skeptical prediction wrong, they were finally ready to be proud of their son. But the timing felt calculated in a way that broke something inside me. Not when I was struggling in my studio apartment, learning to rebuild my life. Not when I was working 16-hour days while maintaining a minimum wage job. Not when I was celebrating small victories alone in my office. Only now, when my success had been validated by Forbes magazine and attached to a specific dollar amount, were they ready to love me again. Sarah found me sitting on our bedroom floor that evening, phone in my hands, surrounded by printed copies of the messages I'd screenshot. They want to reconcile, I said without looking up. All of them. 8 years of nothing, and now they want to make things right. She sat down beside me, reading the messages over my shoulder. Her silence was comfortable. She understood that I needed to process this without immediate advice or judgment. How do you feel? She finally asked. Angry, I admitted, and sad, and confused. I used to fantasize about this moment, the day they'd finally acknowledge that they were wrong about me. But now that it's here, it doesn't feel like vindication. It feels like confirmation that their love was always conditional. The other messages provided context for their sudden interest. A former colleague had forwarded congratulations from our high school alumni network. Alina had called to warn me that several journalists were requesting interviews. 3 investment firms had sent formal offers to discuss acquisition or funding opportunities. My success was no longer private. It was public, quantifiable, impossible to dismiss or ignore. The Forbes article had reached their social circles, their professional networks, their friends and neighbors. My achievements were now part of their family story, whether they acknowledged me or not. Over the weekend, the messages continued. David sent a longer text explaining that our parents had been talking about reaching out for months but hadn't known how. Jennifer forwarded a family photo from a recent gathering, writing, "You were missed here." My mother called twice, leaving voicemails that started confident but became increasingly emotional as she struggled to find words for 8 years of silence. The most manipulative message came from my father on Sunday evening. "Marcus, we always knew you had potential. We're sorry if our concerns came across as lack of support. Family should stick together, especially now that you're facing new pressures as a successful entrepreneur. Call us." Alina helped me understand what I was experiencing when we met for our regular Monday coffee. "They're not reconciling with you," she said bluntly. "They're trying to reconcile with your success. There's a difference." "But what if they've genuinely changed?" I asked. "What if they realized they made a mistake? Then they would have reached out when you were struggling, not when you were featured in Forbes. Think about it. What's changed about you as a person since last week? You're the same son you were before the article published." The pressure to respond was enormous. Sarah gently suggested that I at least call them back, if only to establish boundaries for any future relationship. My employees, several of whom had become close friends, offered varying advice, ranging from complete forgiveness to permanent estrangement, but it was an unexpected source that provided the clearest perspective. Dr. Patricia Williams from Regional Medical Systems called on Tuesday morning with what she thought was a routine business update. "I saw the Forbes piece," she said. "Congratulations on the recognition. Though I have to say, I'm not surprised. We've been telling people for 2 years that your technology was revolutionary. It's nice that the business press finally caught up." Her casual tone reminded me of something crucial. The people who really mattered had been supporting me long before my success became public. My employees had trusted their careers to my vision when DataBridge was still unproven. Sarah had chosen to build a life with me when my future was uncertain. Alina had mentored me when I was a failed entrepreneur with more determination than credentials. These people had seen value in Marcus Chen, the person, not Marcus Chen, the Forbes featured CEO. They'd supported me based on character and potential, rather than achievements and net worth. That evening, I drafted responses to my family's messages. Not angry replies. Anger would suggest they still had power over my emotions. Not eager reconciliation that would validate their conditional approach to love. Instead, I wrote carefully measured responses that acknowledged their outreach while establishing clear boundaries. "Thank you for reaching out. I appreciate your congratulations on the Forbes article. Building DataBridge has been rewarding work, and I'm proud of what our team has accomplished. I'm open to rebuilding our relationship, but it needs to be based on mutual respect and understanding, not just shared celebration of success. Let me know if you're interested in that kind of connection." I sent the same message to all 3 of them, then turned off my phone. Whatever came next would come, but it would happen on terms that honored the person I'd become during our years apart. Someone who understood the difference between conditional approval and unconditional love. Someone who valued character over achievement. Someone who'd learned that the most meaningful relationships were built on acceptance rather than accomplishment. Asterisk, asterisk. The restaurant they chose for our reunion was expensive, the kind of place, with leather menus and servers who described each dish like it was a small work of art. I arrived 15 minutes early, partially from nervousness and partially because I wanted to control at least one element of this encounter. When the hostess seated me at their reserved table, I realized they'd specifically requested the private dining area, away from other guests who might overhear our conversation. David arrived first, looking older than I'd expected but successful. In that polished way that came from years of steady career advancement, his handshake was firm, professional, like we were colleagues rather than brothers who hadn't spoken in 8 years. "You look good, Marcus," he said, settling into his chair. "The Forbes photo didn't do you justice." Jennifer appeared next, her lawyer's training evident in the way she assessed the room before making eye contact with me. Her hug was brief but seemed genuine, though I caught her glancing at my watch, a simple piece I'd owned for years as if cataloging visible signs of my financial success. My parents entered together, my mother's eyes immediately filling with tears, my father maintaining the controlled expression he'd perfected during my childhood. Their aging was more pronounced than my siblings'. 8 years had added gray to my father's hair and lines around my mother's eyes that hadn't been there during our last conversation. "Marcus," my mother said, her voice breaking slightly, "thank you for agreeing to meet us." The conversation started safely, with updates about their lives that carefully avoided any reference to my absence. David's surgical practice was thriving. He'd been promoted to chief of cardiovascular surgery at his hospital. Jennifer had made senior partner and was being considered for the firm's management committee. My parents had sold their large house and moved to a smaller place in a retirement community. Though they were both still working part-time, they asked polite questions about DataBridge, the kind of questions people ask when they've researched your company online but don't actually understand what you do. My father was particularly interested in our revenue numbers and client list, while my mother kept mentioning how proud she was, as if repetition could erase 8 years of silence. "We always knew you had the potential for something like this," my father said during the appetizer course. "We just wanted you to build a foundation first, establish some security before taking entrepreneurial risks." The revisionist history was breathtaking. I remembered their words clearly: the disappointment, the conditions, the ultimatum that had severed our relationship. But now they were reframing their rejection as protective concern, their abandonment as tough love. "That's not how I remember it," I said carefully. "I remember being told I was an embarrassment. I remember being given an ultimatum to abandon my dreams or find somewhere else to live." An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Jennifer, predictably, tried to mediate. "We were all emotional back then. People say things they don't mean when they're worried about someone they love." "But you did mean it," I replied, "and you acted on it. For 8 years. My mother reached across the table, trying to take my hand. "We made mistakes, Marcus. We let our fears about your future affect our judgment. We should have been more supportive." The admission felt hollow because it avoided the core issue. They hadn't been wrong about my future being uncertain. They'd been wrong about love being conditional uncertainty. They'd abandoned me when I needed support most, then reappeared when supporting me became socially advantageous. The real agenda emerged during the main course. My father began discussing their current financial situation with the careful casualness of someone introducing a sensitive topic. The retirement community was more expensive than they'd anticipated. My mother's part-time work barely covered her medical expenses. Their investment portfolio had performed poorly over the past few years. "We're not asking for help," my father said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "We just want you to know that we're proud of your success and hope to be part of your life again." David and Jennifer exchanged glances that suggested they'd coordinated this approach in advance. The family reunion wasn't about reconciliation, it was about repositioning themselves to benefit from my financial success. They wanted back into my life now that my life included resources they needed. "How much do you need?" I asked directly. The question surprised them. They'd expected to dance around the financial implications, to rebuild the relationship first, and discuss money later. But I'd learned during my entrepreneurial journey that clarity was kinder than ambiguity. "Marcus, this isn't about money," my mother said quickly. "Isn't it?" I replied. "You had 8 years to decide that family relationships were more important than conditional approval. You chose to reach out 3 days after Forbes published my valuation. The timing suggests this is very much about money." My father's expression hardened into the familiar mask of paternal authority. "We raised you, Marcus. We supported you through college. We gave you opportunities that led to your success. Family members help each other." The entitlement was staggering. They'd financially supported me through age 22, then abandoned me completely when I most needed their belief in my potential. Now they wanted credit for my achievements and access to my resources based on biological connection rather than earned relationship. "You're right that family members help each other," I said, "but that help needs to be mutual, and it needs to be based on love rather than leverage." I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo from DataBridge's recent company retreat, employees and their families at a weekend conference where we'd celebrated our achievements and planned our future growth. These people are my family now, I said. They supported me when my success was uncertain. They believed in my vision when it was risky to do so. They celebrate my victories and help me navigate challenges. That's what family actually does. The dinner continued for another hour, but the dynamic had shifted. They realized I wasn't the same desperate son who'd needed their approval 8 years earlier. I'd built a life, a career, and relationships that didn't require their validation. Their opportunity to be meaningful parts of my journey had passed during the years when they'd chosen silence over support. As we prepared to leave, my mother made one final attempt. Can we start over, Marcus? Can we build something new together? We can build something, I replied, but it won't be what we had before, and it won't be based on what I can provide for you financially. If you're interested in knowing me as a person rather than as a resource, I'm open to that conversation. The receipt from that dinner still sits in my files, $347 for a meal that clarified everything I needed to know about their motivations and my boundaries. They'd returned to my life not because they'd learned to love me unconditionally, but because they'd learned that my success was too valuable to ignore. ****. The financial records arrived via overnight delivery 3 weeks after our restaurant reunion, sent by a private investigator I'd hired to understand my family's true situation. I'd learned during my entrepreneurial journey that making informed decisions required complete information, especially when emotions complicated the analysis. The documents painted a picture more complex than I'd expected. My parents weren't destitute, but they weren't comfortable either. Their retirement savings had been depleted by a series of poor investment decisions and unexpected medical expenses. My father's consulting income was sporadic, and my mother's part-time work barely covered their premium healthcare costs. More revealing were David's financial records. His successful surgical practice was leveraged to the point of fragility, expensive house payments, private school tuition for his children, luxury car leases that projected success while consuming most of his income. He was earning substantial money but living paycheck to paycheck, trapped in the kind of lifestyle inflation that made high earners financially vulnerable. Jennifer's situation was different but equally precarious. Her law firm partnership required significant capital contributions, and her income fluctuated based on billable hours and case outcomes. She'd recently gone through an expensive divorce that had divided her assets and left her responsible for substantial legal fees. The investigator's report concluded that all 3 family members were facing financial pressure, not immediate crisis, but the kind of chronic stress that came from maintaining appearances while struggling with underlying instability. Their sudden interest in reconciliation made perfect sense, viewed through this lens, but it was the supplemental research that truly shocked me. The investigator had also looked into their behavior during my years of estrangement. Public records showed that my father had used my streamline IT failure as a cautionary tale in several professional presentations about entrepreneurial risk management. My mother had apparently told neighbors that I was taking time to find himself rather than admitting I'd been financially ruined and forced to move home. Most painfully, I discovered that they'd attended David's promotion celebration, Jennifer's partnership announcement, and numerous family gatherings where my absence was simply accepted as normal. They hadn't been mourning our estrangement, they'd been managing it as a social inconvenience. Sarah found me in my home office that evening, surrounded by the investigator's files, trying to process the gap between the family that had raised me and the people these documents revealed. They created a narrative where your failure was temporary and your absence was your choice, she said after reviewing the key findings, that allowed them to maintain their self-image as supportive parents while avoiding the discomfort of acknowledging their role in the estrangement. 8 years, I said, staring at a photograph of Jennifer's partnership celebration where my absence wasn't even mentioned in the local newspaper coverage. 8 years of family events where I was simply erased from the story. The records also revealed something I hadn't expected. They'd been following my career progress through mutual connections and public information. David had colleagues at hospitals that used data bridge technology. Jennifer's firm had represented clients in the healthcare industry who'd mentioned our innovations. My parents had likely known about my growing success long before the Forbes article made it undeniable. Their reconciliation attempt wasn't spontaneous emotion, triggered by seeing my magazine profile. It was calculated strategy based on information they'd been gathering for months or years. They'd waited until my success was substantial enough to justify overlooking our history and risking the social awkwardness of re-establishing contact. The revelation transformed my anger into something colder and more strategic. I wasn't dealing with family members who'd made emotional mistakes. I was dealing with people who'd made calculated choices about when my value to them outweighed their discomfort with my unconventional path. Alina helped me understand the dynamics. When I shared the investigator's findings during our weekly meeting, "They're not evil people," she said. "They're just people who prioritize social comfort and financial security over emotional authenticity. Unfortunately, that makes them incapable of the kind of relationship you're seeking." "So what do I do?" I asked. "Cut them off completely. Pretend the reconciliation attempt never happened. You have something they need," Elena replied. that gives you leverage to set terms for any relationship. The question is whether you want to use that leverage for punishment, education, or strategic distance. That weekend, I drafted a comprehensive response to their reconciliation overtures, not an emotional letter about hurt feelings and broken trust, but a business proposal that addressed their financial needs while protecting my emotional boundaries. I proposed establishing a family assistance fund, $2 million in a trust account, that would provide them with monthly distributions sufficient to address their financial pressures. The money would come with specific conditions. No direct contact requests about business opportunities, no attempts to involve me in extended family events, and no public discussion of our relationship status. The trust would be managed by a third administrator, eliminating the need for ongoing financial negotiations between us. They would receive the support they clearly needed, but without the emotional manipulation that had characterized their reconciliation attempt. Most importantly, the arrangement acknowledged reality. They needed my financial resources more than they wanted my emotional presence. By formalizing that dynamic, we could avoid the pretense of rebuilding a relationship that had been fundamentally transactional from their perspective. Sarah reviewed my proposal before I sent it, suggesting minor modifications that strengthened the legal protections while maintaining the core message. "This is generous," she said, "but it's also honest. You're giving them what they actually want, while protecting yourself from what they're not capable of providing." The response I sent was brief and professional. "I understand that you're facing financial challenges, and I'm willing to help address those challenges through the attached proposal. This arrangement allows me to support you practically while maintaining appropriate boundaries emotionally. Please review the terms with your attorneys and let me know if you find them acceptable." 3 days later, I received acceptance messages from all 3 family members. Not gratitude, not emotional acknowledgement of the complexity involved, just professional acceptance of terms that solve their immediate problems. The brevity of their responses told me everything I needed to know about their priorities and confirmed the wisdom of my approach. They wanted my resources, not my relationship. I was providing exactly what they'd asked for, even if they hadn't been honest enough to ask for it directly. ***. The legal documents establishing the Chen Family Assistance Trust were 47 pages of precisely crafted language that transformed an emotional minefield into a manageable business arrangement. Sarah had worked with estate planning attorneys to ensure the structure protected everyone involved. My family received guaranteed financial support while I maintained complete control over the terms and duration of that support. The trust would provide my parents with $4,000 monthly, David with $3,000, and Jennifer with $2,500 amounts, calculated to address their specific financial pressures without creating dependency or enabling lifestyle inflation. The payments would continue for 10 years, with provisions for early termination if the recipients violated the agreement's behavioral clauses. Those clauses were comprehensive and non-negotiable. No contact regarding business opportunities or investment requests. No public discussion of our family relationship without my explicit consent. No attempts to involve me in extended family events, holidays, or social gatherings. No sharing of my personal contact information with relatives, friends, or business associates. Most importantly, the agreement included a clause requiring all communication to flow through the trust administrator. If they wanted to send me updates about their lives, express gratitude for the support, or attempt any form of personal connection, those messages would be filtered through a neutral third party who could identify and block any manipulative or guilt-inducing content. The signing ceremony took place in a conference room at Sarah's law firm, with each family member accompanied by their personal attorneys. The atmosphere was businesslike rather than emotional. Everyone understood we were formalizing a financial arrangement, not repairing familial bonds. My father reviewed each clause methodically, occasionally conferring with his attorney about specific language. My mother signed quickly, as if prolonging the process might cause me to reconsider the offer. David and Jennifer approached the documents with professional efficiency, treating the trust like any other legal contract they might encounter in their careers. "This is very generous," Jennifer said as we prepared to leave. "We want you to know that we appreciate the trust administrator will handle all acknowledgments." I interrupted gently. "That's why we established this structure." The boundary felt strange to enforce, but necessary. Any personal interaction, even expressions of gratitude, could become the foundation for future emotional manipulation. The trust eliminated those opportunities by channeling all communication through professional intermediaries, * over the following months. The arrangement proved its value. The monthly distributions addressed their financial pressures without requiring ongoing negotiation or emotional labor from me. I received quarterly reports from the trust administrator confirming that payments had been made and terms were being followed, but no direct communication from the recipients. The silence was initially unsettling. After 8 years of complete estrangement followed by intense reconciliation attempts, the structured distance felt artificial. But gradually, I began to appreciate the emotional freedom it provided. I could focus on building my life with Sarah, growing data bridge, and developing relationships with people who valued me for reasons unrelated to my financial resources. Alina helped me understand that psychological benefits during one of our conversations. 6 months after the trust's establishment, you've removed the uncertainty, she explained. They can't surprise you with financial emergencies or emotional manipulation because you've already addressed their needs. That mental space you've reclaimed is incredibly valuable. The most significant test came during the holidays. Traditionally, this would have been a period of guilt, longing, and complicated emotions about family traditions I was no longer part of. Instead, I spent Thanksgiving with Sarah's family in New Orleans, warm, accepting people who welcomed me without conditions or complicated history. Christmas was quiet and intentional, just Sarah and me in our apartment, exchanging meaningful gifts and planning our future together. No family drama, no obligatory visits, no careful navigation of old grievances and unspoken expectations. This feels healthy, Sarah observed, as we cooked dinner together on Christmas Day. You're not angry anymore. You're not sad about missing family gatherings. You've found peace with the situation. She was right. The trust had transformed my relationship with my family from a source of ongoing emotional complexity into a manageable administrative responsibility. I supported them financially because I could afford to do so and because it eliminated their primary motivation for contacting me. But I wasn't emotionally invested in their response to that support. The arrangement also clarified something important about my own values. I didn't want revenge against my family. I wanted freedom from their conditional love and manipulative behavior. The trust provided that freedom while allowing me to be generous within appropriate boundaries. DataBridge continued growing throughout this period, largely because I could focus completely on business challenges without the distraction of family drama. We expanded into new markets, developed partnerships with major technology companies, and began exploring acquisition opportunities that could accelerate our growth trajectory. The Forbes article had generated sustainable business opportunities, rather than just temporary attention. Enterprise clients who'd been researching our technology for months finally moved forward with implementation decisions. Investment firms continued expressing interest in funding our expansion, though we remained profitable and self-sufficient. Most importantly, my employees saw me as increasingly confident and decisive. I was no longer the driven entrepreneur trying to prove something to absent family members. I was a business leader focused on building something meaningful with people who chose to be part of that journey. The trust document sat in my home safe, a symbol of boundaries successfully established and maintained. 47 pages of legal language that had transformed a complicated emotional relationship into a simple financial arrangement, protecting everyone involved while acknowledging the reality of what each party actually wanted from the connection. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly free from my family's approval or disapproval. They were taken care of financially, I was protected emotionally, and we could all move forward without the pretense of relationships that had never been based on mutual respect and unconditional love. Asterisk. The photo on my desk now shows what family actually looks like. Sarah and me in the hospital 3 hours after Emma Chendalacqua was born. Our daughter's tiny face peaceful between us, our exhausted smiles radiating pure joy. Behind us, barely visible in the frame, stands Alina with flowers and Rachel from DataBridge, with a welcome baby Emma balloon from the entire team. These are the people who showed up during the most important moment of my life, not because they were obligated by blood or motivated by financial interest, but because they'd chosen to be part of our journey and we'd chosen to be part of theirs. Emma is 18 months old now, walking with the determined confidence of someone who's never doubted that the world is fundamentally safe and welcoming. She babbles constantly in the multilingual mix that comes from having a Creole-speaking mother and a Mandarin-speaking father, though her first clear word was Alina appropriate, since my mentor visits twice a week and has officially claimed grandparent privileges. Watching Sarah with Emma has taught me things about unconditional love that I'd never understood before. There are no performance metrics for being Emma's parents, no achievements required to earn her affection, no conditions attached to our support of her dreams. We love her completely because she exists, not because of anything she accomplishes or contributes. This, I realize, is what I'd been seeking from my biological family, the simple acceptance that should have been my birthright but became something I had to learn to provide for myself and others. DataBridge's valuation has grown to $47 million, according to the latest investment bank assessments. We've expanded into 17 countries. Our technology processes over 100 million transactions daily, and 3 of our competitors have made acquisition offers that would make me wealthy beyond any practical need. But the numbers feel less important now than they did during my driven years of building toward some undefined threshold of enough success. Emma doesn't care about our revenue growth or market penetration. She cares about whether Daddy makes funny faces during breakfast and whether Mommy sings the right songs during bath time. The perspective shift has made me a better leader, not a less ambitious one. DataBridge's team has grown to 127 employees, who genuinely enjoy their work. Because we've created a culture based on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than artificial urgency and competitive pressure. You've changed, Alina observed during our quarterly business review last month. You're still driven, still innovative, still focused on building something meaningful. But you're not running from anything anymore. That makes you more effective because you're running towards something specific. She's right. For years, I'd been building DataBridge partly as proof that my family had been wrong about my potential. Now I'm building it as a legacy for Emma, as meaningful work that solves real problems, as a way to create opportunities for talented people who share our values. The trust fund continues operating smoothly, providing my biological family with financial support while maintaining the emotional boundaries that protect my chosen family. I receive quarterly reports confirming that payments are being made and terms are being followed, but no direct communication from the recipients. Occasionally, I wonder whether they ever think about Emma, their granddaughter and niece who exists, because I found love and stability outside their influence. But the wondering doesn't create urgency or sadness anymore. They made their choices about what kind of relationships they valued, and I made mine. Sarah and I are planning Emma's second birthday party for next month. The guest list includes DataBridge employees and their families, Sarah's relatives from New Orleans, Alina and her husband, and several entrepreneurs from our Thursday evening mentoring group who've become genuine friends over the years. It will be a celebration of the community we've built together, people who support each other during challenges, celebrate each other's successes, and show up consistently because they want to be present, not because they need something or feel obligated by circumstance. This is what I wanted to give you, I tell Emma during our evening walks around the neighborhood, her small hand gripping my finger as she practices walking on sidewalks that still challenge her balance. A family that chooses you every day, a community that sees your worth as inherent rather than earned, people who love you for who you are rather than what you might become. She responds with the kind of babbled commentary that suggests she's processing everything I'm saying, even if she can't yet respond with words, but her trust is absolute. She knows that Daddy will catch her if she falls, support her as she learns to navigate the world, and love her unconditionally through whatever challenges and opportunities await her. The Forbes article that triggered my family's reconciliation attempt now sits in a frame in my office, not as a trophy but as a reminder of an important lesson. External validation feels meaningful only when it's not the primary source of your self-worth. I don't need my parents to be proud of me anymore. I don't need my siblings to acknowledge my success. I don't need anyone's permission to define my own version of achievement and fulfillment. What I need, what I have is this: a partner who chose to build a life with me when my future was uncertain. A daughter who will grow up knowing that love is not conditional on performance. A team of colleagues who trust my vision because they've seen how I treat people during both successes and setbacks. And a mentor who believed in my potential before I believed in it myself. The boy in that 1995 family portrait, standing in the shadows behind his high-achieving siblings, dreamed of someday earning a place at the center of the frame. But the man I've become understands that the most important photos are the ones where everyone in the frame chose to be there, where love is evident rather than performed, where family is defined by commitment rather than biology. Emma will grow up in those kinds of photos. She'll build relationships based on mutual respect and shared values. She'll understand that success is worth pursuing, but not at the cost of becoming someone unworthy of love. And if she ever faces rejection from people who should support her unconditionally, she'll know that their failure to see her value doesn't diminish that value. It simply helps her identify who belongs in her chosen family and who doesn't. That's the legacy I'm building now. Not just a successful company, but a successful life that demonstrates how love, work, and purpose can be integrated into something meaningful and sustainable. The rest is just numbers on a balance sheet.